Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Racism is everywhere, so why not move south? So begins the opinion piece written by freelance journalist Reniqua Allen in the Sunday Review of the New York Times. But the piece is more than a discussion of Black relocation trends. It's about the changing perception among African American millennials, those who are 37 years old and under, about where economic opportunity, a sense of community, the real Black social scene, and their true home can be found. Welcome. In your article in the Times, you cited some statistics saying that in the year 2014, more than 80,000 Black millennials, mostly from the Northeast, from the Midwest, and from the West, moved south. Now, it seems like I've been reading stories about Black people moving back south for decades. So how is this different?
You're right. Black people, since basically the Great Migration to the North ended, they started moving back down south. I think what's different for me is not just the relocation back to the South, but really a relocation of kind of the culture, the youth, the young culture of Black America. It seems like the heart is really in the South. It's not in New York City anymore. And to me, that's a huge deal. And also that, Black millennials are moving different places than their white millennial counterparts. So yes, the story in many ways are the same, but there are new and interesting things happening. And for a generation that it's supposed to be so diverse, that is integrated in theory as much as more than generations past, it really made me wonder what's going on here.
You write that. In fact, you just finished. You're working on you have a book coming out. You did a lot of research on Black millennials, and this is where it comes from. You write that Black millennials, the ones that you interview, seem to feel that Black life, real Black life, is now in the South. What does that mean?
So it's interesting. I'm thinking of this, one young woman who's an attorney and moved to New York City and said that there were tons of Black people in New York. But in a place like New York, you have a lot of African Americans, some who are from the South, some who are from Guyana, like my father is from. You have Black folk that are from all over the Caribbean, that are from Africa. So there's an ethnic divide. And when I thought of that, I think she's right that Black folks, the Black community feels far more divided than in the South. Places like Atlanta where it feels really cohesive. And I think about when I first moved to college. I went to college in Washington, D.C. They act like it's not the South. I think I kind of disagree, but D.C. to me still feels quite Southern, and I moved down there, this is 1999, and I remember with my mom driving through the downtown and seeing all these Black professionals in business suits. It just what would be a quote unquote normal restaurant. It wasn't a soul food spot, it wasn't some kind of Southern fusion, it was just regular professionals eating. And there were all these Black folks there eating. And I realized I hadn't quite seen that kind of scene in New York. It felt more segregated and more diverse. And to see these Black professionals all eating at this, restaurant, this normal restaurant with white folks, it was new to me and it was astounding. And I realized, I guess, how segregated I think communities are in New York City, in the New York City area. And that's me saying that growing up in a Black neighborhood and, seeing Black professionals all the time. But
a sense of a larger Black middle class community that you could tap into easily. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I think it's a middle class community, definitely. But also, even the working class culture, I think, feels like it's rooted in the South now. It feels like, and someone said this, Black America is the South now. And it felt like that, and it feels like that. When I think about, even the culture when I was growing up, it was so New York City centric. It was Biggie and Jay-Z and Nas and all these like superstars, hip hop was centered in New York City. It felt like so much of the culture, the clothes, even the way, people talk was centered in New York City. And now that's all in the South. I was trying to think with a friend of like what big rapper, really came out of the North that recently, and I could think of like Nicki Minaj and Fetty Wap, who's in Patterson, but really the culture feels like it's moved to the South. You think about Tyler Perry Studios. When I was growing up, it was, Spike Lee and his 40 Acres of Mules, and all that stuff feels like it's moved to the South. So I think it's like the heart of Black America feels like it's moved to the South, more so than, New York City anymore. New York City doesn't feel like the city of dreams, at least for Black people in the same way.
That's interesting, because New York used to be, this is the place you came to make your dreams come true, and you had the Harlem Renaissance, but is Atlanta the place where you moved to make your dreams come true?
That is the place that everybody says so. By far, Atlanta was seen as the place where if you want to do something, particularly if you want to do something in entertainment, that was the place to go. And there's some things to that, right? Like economically, it is a bit cheaper. There's more space, which I was shocked that that's what people were saying, particularly young people. They were just like, I need space to breathe and think. Someone said they wanted to see the stars at night. Things that you don't usually hear young Black people talking about,
right,
at least in the media. They just wanted to create a sense of freedom, so to speak, and that's
well, certainly. I mean, if you watch the reality shows, and I have to confess that I do watch some of them, The Real Housewives of Atlanta, which is about Black women who are either married to or have been married to wealthy men, often athletes. If you look at Atlanta Plastic, which is about Black plastic surgeons performing cosmetic surgery on, I guess, presumably middle-class Black people. Married to Medicine, which is about black doctors practicing in Atlanta and all of their foibles. Love and Hip Hop, about the hip hop musicians who live and work in Atlanta. And when you see pictures of the mansions that are owned by, Black celebrities, musicians, athletes in Atlanta, you get the impression that Atlanta has become sort of the hub for Black people and the hub of an upscale, even over the top kind of social life. And I've just sort of wondered, is this the reality or is it just reality TV? But you seem to be suggesting that it is the reality now.
Well, let me dial that back a little bit. I think it is the reality, certainly culturally, but by all means, Atlanta is hard, it's segregated. One of the things that some folks spoke to me about is that it feels very much like a place where the Black middle class there might be thriving, but the other classes are not doing so well. Poor folk have a hard time. It's a city where you need transportation to get around.
Right.
I spoke to one young woman who was trying to actually go back to Atlanta, who moved there from the suburbs of New Jersey. And she said that it was hard there when she lost her job. She had to turn to stripping. She tried to make Atlanta work. She loved it, but it was really hard without a job and, with kids. So at the same time, while I recognize that it is, culturally definitely the heart of Black America, and I think economically maybe life is easier, it has all the same problems that other large cities do, that Black America is having.
Because, during the Great Migration, 1915, 1960s, Blacks moved north. They didn't want to be sharecroppers anymore. They didn't want to be lynched and, have to live under Jim Crow. But in addition to that, they could get better jobs. They could go to work at the GM plant and all kinds of jobs in city government that they couldn't get down in the South. And my question is, can you now get better jobs in the South than you can get in the North if you're a Black person?
That's a good question. And I didn't directly address, the jobs question in that way. Wages are slightly lower for Black millennials in the South. However, more Black millennials are employed in the South regionally than in the North. The thing that people, at least anecdotally, talk about the most is cost of living.
Yeah.
It's cheaper.
Right.
So I think that's what the big draw is. But by all means, jobs seem like they are a challenge for millennials, Black millennials particularly, all over the country. And student debt and all these other things are, absolutely contributing to very unequal circumstances for young folks.
So better quality of life, cheaper, but this idea of that the Southern migration is about community and What do young blacks find in terms of community in Atlanta or Raleigh or wherever that they don't find in New York or LA?
So I think that's a great question. I think that it's a shared sense of community. I think a lot of the folks that I spoke to talked more about a black-white divide in the South, where in the North they felt like it was black, white, Latino, Asian. They felt that it was very disparate. And I think there is this kind of shared sense of humanity, a shared sense of culture that they felt in the South that they weren't feeling in northern communities, in New York City. I think that in one woman, I can't remember if this made it into the Times piece, she said that I can walk somewhere and just run into people who are like me, who understand my experience, who get who I am. And she didn't feel like she could do that in New York City.
Okay. I lived in Boston for a while, after college. And strange place, strange place racially, because you know that there are middle-class blacks there, but you didn't know where they were. You couldn't find them. It was very difficult to find them. And I interviewed a middle-aged black woman who had lived in Boston for about a decade before she moved to New York. And she said that it was 9 years before she had a date in Boston. And he was from another city.
Right.
And I guess sort of my question is the social scene for young blacks better in the South? I mean, we hear about how difficult it is for college-educated black women to meet eligible men in New York City and certainly in Boston and other places. Are they going to do better in Atlanta? Do you hear that?
I hear that Atlanta is not great for that. It's not the answer, no. Wow, that's a good, everywhere I went, people love to talk to me about relationships, even when I don't ask about it. And for single, black, at least heterosexual women, they said that Atlanta was not the place to be. And honestly, I haven't figured out where the place is on that question for young black millennials. But socially, absolutely, Atlanta and other places in the South, I should say, because I think Miami is also true. Those seem to be more of a scene. It seemed to be more of a scene for young black people, entertainment-wise, professionals, musically, like I mentioned, so much of black culture seems to be rooted in the South. So absolutely, it seemed like the scene was stronger. And it could just, be that the community is a little more close-knit than in the North or in like a place like New York City where you have to go from Brooklyn to Harlem to the Bronx.
But for young single black women, you might still have to go to Paris.
Oh, yeah, that seems like the case.
We're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with writer Reniqua Allen after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Reniqua Allen. When I was growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, I just wanted to get out of there, out of the South, because at the time it was a place of complete segregation, of hatred against blacks, of violence against blacks. And so my question is that no longer true? Is the North now the place where you see the violence against blacks? I know we've seen, incidents of white cops in the North killing unarmed black men. And we know that I believe New York City schools are the most segregated, racially segregated in the country. So is North now the place where blacks are discriminated against as opposed to the South?
Honestly, I think it's everywhere. That's kind of the premise of the piece, that the South is no longer any worse or any better, or maybe it never had been. I think it's perception. I'm definitely super northern elitist snob, or at least, going into some of this research I was, where I saw a Confederate flag and was like, oh my God, it's racist, it's horrible. And I think that for me, just such a visceral reminder of, or at least what, the flag stood for, was such a visceral reminder of slavery and oppression that, I forget that every time I pass like the Barclays Stadium in Brooklyn that, they, contributed to, the slave trade and all these other institutions in the North, and even in my hometown of Inglewood, where there was discrimination, rampant discrimination against Black folks. So I think it's perception. And so I started off the piece talking about, the piece in the New York Times, talking about an incident where I felt like mistreated in this coffee place on the Upper East Side, and how uncomfortable I felt on the Upper East Side.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I was walking, wanted to get a cup of espresso, and was asked by the barista if I knew that the cup was a small cup and that it came in such a tiny, tiny size. And I was just shocked because he didn't ask anyone else this, and it was clearly...
Basically, they didn't know that do you really know what an espresso is?
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. And it was this really frustrating moment for me, on top of a frustrating kind of afternoon that I had, being followed all the time. I look young, especially if I have a backpack on and headphones and, big earrings. And on the Upper East Side, I just felt like, and I continuously feel like it's not a place for me, even though people after say I don't feel like it's a place for me either, even though they were white or whatever. But it was a frustrating day, and to just want this overpriced cup of coffee and have someone kind of question me about it and not question anyone else was just a frustrating experience. And people afterwards said, that's not racism. And I wanted to challenge people, right, on what racism looks like for my generation, because I do think it looks a lot different than my parents. Racism isn't like, there's actually an article today about a young boy who may have had a lynching mark around him, a young kid. So I guess maybe in some ways, and police officers are definitely still killing young Black folks. So maybe in some ways, it does look similar to the past. But I think in many ways, and the more prevalent thing, is that it's these like daily microaggressions. Like racism doesn't necessarily look like a cross burning in your yard, and I can go in.
Or somebody calling you by the N-word even.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, this place is on the East Side, because, that's where you go in New York City to be reminded about racism. Because either people assume you're a maid, if you're on the East Side, because you can't possibly live there. I go to the East Side if I want to not get waited on in a restaurant, or I've been told not to stand. I was waiting for my ride out to Queens College and standing on the steps of this building just to stay out of the wind. Told to get off the steps because, God knows we don't want Black people standing on the steps. The property values might fall. But the East Side is a place where Black people are not particularly welcome except as the help.
I feel like that. I got a lot of pushback for that too.
Yeah.
By far, more than anything, people were very angry about me talking about this cup of coffee, espresso. Like, they were very upset about it. They said, that's not evidence. I lived through the civil rights movement, and that's not racism. And for me, I wanted to show how tiring it can be to be Black in America, and how it comes at you in many different ways.
Even in New York.
Even in New York,
right.
A city of dreams.
Another reason that I love the South was because I wanted to get away from what I perceived as a kind of small-mindedness of both the white and the Black population. The pressure to conform in your behavior and in your thinking, the heavy emphasis on religion. Do you get a sense that the South has become more open-minded on these issues, and that's one reason that Black people might be more amenable to moving back there?
Well, I did for this piece talk to a bunch of Black atheists. But yes, I do think that the South is becoming more progressive on these issues around race, even though I think there's still like, a third number of transgender folks that were still killed in the South. There are all these fights over, bathroom discrimination. But I really find that the entire country has become problematic. For me, I still see it more in the South. I do. The Confederate flag is still
I was just about to, yeah.
really hard for me to see. I don't like things with the word plantation in them unless it's like a history museum visit. Like, I don't think it's cute. Like, I think there's a trend to have weddings at plantations. Like, that stuff is hard for me and it's painful. And maybe, I think the North just does a better job of hiding it in some ways. And, I work for a lot of progressive outlets. And so this kind of and racism, I'll say, sometimes can be hidden behind degrees and all these kind of elite and intellectual endeavors. But it's just as bad, I think, And when I think about it, and when I sat down to write that, I was like, I haven't really experienced racism in the South. Like, no one's ever called me the N-word. I have experienced more of that in the North, and a lot of times by elites.
Yeah, and of course you have the current controversy over the Confederate statues and monuments, and what do you do about them? Now I have to say, I don't want the Confederate flag flying over the state capitol, and I think most places they don't fly them there anymore. I don't have the problem with the Confederate statues. I guess partly because I'm a Civil War buff, and I know it was the South fought hard. They fought well. They were on the wrong side of history, but it's history. And I guess the best person who described it, somebody was talking to a news reporter and said, like if you hide the history, then how can people learn from it? I don't know how you feel about the statues.
The statues. Well, I was there in New Orleans watching, just inadvertently happened to be there and ran across this Robert E. Lee statue being removed. And it's a hard thing for me to figure out. I think it is because I came from the North, going to the South and seeing a Robert Lee Highway or, those type of things. I guess it's more than just history for me. It is a history that is honoring the legacy of something that was so painful and hurtful. And I know a lot of people compare this to Germany and, the way they deal with the Holocaust. And I do think that for me, when I see Confederate flags and statues, it's not so much presented as this is something that we did wrong. This is where we screwed up. I think for the way I interpret it, they're saying, look at you guys. This is what America should have been or could have been, or it's not so much, I think it's the context and the way it's presented in this country and the spirit of America, which, I think a lot of times it's like, we didn't do anything wrong. So I don't know.
I have the Southerners.
The Southerners,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And I don't think that's understood. And I think it's presented in a different way. And I feel like if it was presented in a way that I think that Germany presents the Holocaust, it was a way that, they're saying this should never happen again.
Yeah.
Yes, this happened and it was wrong, but it can never happen again.
And in Germany, they're really out front with that.
Yeah, and I don't think we do that in this country.
Okay, interesting. Now, you got about a minute and a half left. You just finished writing a book about Black millennials. What have you learned through your research that you didn't know, and did anything really surprise you?
A lot that, the past is obviously repeats itself, that despite having a Black president, things seem even more frustrating than ever for young Black people. But, and these are things that, I don't know if it's particularly anything new, but I think that people are optimistic about America. Young Black people are doing far worse than their white millennial counterparts, but they have faith somehow that things will get better and that we're really we're fighting for change. I think it's kind of this beautiful, amazing thing about being young and Black in America. But it's this frustrating thing where you have to continuously tell people that your lives matter.
Yeah, yeah. You going to be moving south anytime soon?
Everyone's asking me that. You know, economically it is appealing, but I think I have to wait till they get some more of those statues and flags out of the area. It's hard for me. It's a hard one.
Okay, so we'll check back with you in a year or so, and we'll see where you are.
Thank you so much.
We're out of time. I want to thank Reniqua Allen for joining me today. For more information on Reniqua and her work, you can visit her website, reniquaallen.com. For One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.